I really do think it comes from being at peace with yourself, working on that inner conflicts, inner issues, inner connection, to be able to, from that, create a better connection with the world around you.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Grant, and this is the Grateful Podcast, a place where we explore how to lead sustainable change, gathering insights for how each of us can eat, live, and lead for greater personal and planetary well-being. My guest on the show today is Jehane Akiki, a social entrepreneur and human-centered systems designer, that's a mouthful, originally from Lebanon and now based in the US. I got in contact with Jehane because she runs a really interesting project, or should I say collective, that's called Farms Not Arms. And I came across this work because they were actually listed as one of the semi-finalists in the Food Systems Vision Prize, something that was created by the Rockefeller Foundation last year. I saw their project and became really fascinated by the vision that they had to create a space for refugees and host communities in Lebanon that revolved around food as a tool for not only nutritional security, but for building social cohesion and for offering unique education opportunities and pathways to regenerative futures. So today, Jehane and I have a chat about the vision of Farms Not Arms, the social and environmental challenges the project's tackling, and we also explore what leadership looks like when you center co-creation and collaboration across very different cultures and backgrounds, and why it's so important to create space for feminine values and approaches in leading sustainable change. Aside from being the managing director of Farms Not Arms, Jehane is also the co-founder of IOI Strategic Design and of Learning Blocks. And all of these efforts have seen her acknowledged as one of the World Economic Forum Global Shapers. Now, in trying to set up the conversation with Jehane, it took us some time because she was moving through so many different time zones. So at the start of our conversation, I was really interested to learn more about her story and how it came to be that she has connections to so many different parts of the world.
I was born and raised in Lebanon, and then when I was 17, I moved to the US for university. So I spent 4 years in Boston, after which I moved to New York. And in New York, I worked for a year, then I started doing my master's. And my master's, I was linking international development with design, strategic design, systems design, and design thinking. And so that really, that fusion of international affairs and systems design is what is the essence of what I do now. But being from Lebanon, I also have family in Europe, and throughout my university time, I've built this network of people around the world, especially US-based and Lebanon-based, that have formed also what is the bulk of the Farms Not Arms collective, because it's really about those connections, those global and local connections. So that led me to be in so many different places. And then I was focused a lot on refugee issues. And so because of that, I worked around the Middle East as well, not just in Lebanon, but also in Jordan. I had policy work in Turkey. So that made me also be in a few different places between the US, Europe, and the Middle East.
And so I know agriculture and food is at the center of your work with Farms Not Arms, but you actually don't have a background in food and agriculture. So I'm super interested to learn what was that moment that got you really interested in food as a catalyst for social and environmental change?
Yeah, it was actually the refugee work that got me into food. So prior to beginning to work on food and agriculture, I had been working on the issues of integration. And that has always been a very big issue that's been close to my heart, is people who are marginalized from society. And it's something we need to solve, which is how to eliminate othering people, and this happens on a lot of different levels. And so a lot of my work in my master's was about understanding how to work on structural problems regarding to, slum dwellers, refugees, marginalized communities. And so I really started focusing on the refugee crisis, what now it's like 7 years ago, maybe, when I really started working on it. And that was what really triggered me to focus on refugees specifically, because Lebanon became the country with the highest percentage of refugees in the world. So I was seeing the refugee crisis play out in my country at an unprecedented scale. And so I really felt like I needed to do something about this. And when I was working on the refugee crisis, it was from a systems and design thinking lens. So I created this framework of what are the different things you need to tackle in order to really help someone integrate into a new society. And so a lot of that focus was on education to employment. And I worked a lot in that space of education and how do you provide education, how do you create education programs, and even more strategic, conceptual work around education. And then from that, I had worked with refugees in Lebanon and in Jordan, and then done some policy work in Turkey. And then I met a group of people in New York who were interested in doing a refugee project around food in Lebanon. And because of my work in Lebanon and with refugees, I felt really drawn to it. I'm like, I don't know anything about food, but I really feel drawn to this project, which is now Farms Not Arms, and drawn on using a design process in order to come up with a food security solution to refugee food insecurity, which was the initial focus of Farms Not Arms. But then as we dove into the design process, because usually with design thinking, you start with the problem and not the solution. So as we started diving into this and as we started building that collective that became Farms Not Arms, I was working with a lot of different agricultural experts and food experts, architects, and engineers, and just people who have worked around food from different perspectives. And so I was getting like an education in food and in regeneration and in food security through my work. And so now I'm such a preacher of food systems, of regeneration. And I feel like as much as we've been working on this project for 3 years, and as much as I've helped guide it, I've also been the biggest student of it, because I've learned so much about the necessity and the problems, like the really deep systemic problems of food systems. There are so many things that come together in a food system that, for me, it's one of the most important systems that we need to create some changes in order to also create bigger changes in economic, social, political systems around the world.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I'd love to learn more then about what the idea is behind Farms Not Arms and the philosophy and the principles that you're trying to bring to life through this project.
Yeah, of course. So basically, Farms Not Arms started as a design-led inquiry into creating a solution for refugee food insecurity. And the way we started the project is by really going to refugee camps in Lebanon in the Bekaa region, which is both the agricultural area of Lebanon and also the area with the highest percentage of refugees in Lebanon. We went there and we were doing a lot of visits and just immersive research of spending a lot of time trying to understand where food is coming from, how refugees working in agriculture, trying to really understand the context. And then we had a design sprint in Lebanon with refugees to really map out the problems that they're facing and then the opportunity areas. And then from that, we also had another parallel one afterwards in New York with a lot of different multidisciplinary experts from the whole range of agriculture, from biodynamic to vertical farms and to hydroponics. And then we also had architects, educators, engineers, just a lot of different people coming together. And by doing those two design sprints, we really defined the core pillars of what we're trying to do, which one is nutrition and how can we build a solution that really creates nutritious food. The second was about how we actually create an agricultural solution that helps the planet positively and doesn't create externalities that would exacerbate climate change, because agriculture is one of the biggest pollutants of the planet, and we didn't want to, have a solution on one side for food, but then create a bigger systemic problem and contribute to climate change. So regeneration was a second, core focus. And the third one was social cohesion, because in Lebanon, when you have immigrants and refugees coming into a community, there's usually a lot of social tension. And so we wanted to have our farm and our solution really bring together the local community and refugees and have it be a place of social healing and social cohesion through agriculture, through learning new skills, through growing food together. So when we first started, it was focused on refugees. The refugees in the design sprint, they told us that, you know, we actually fear for our security if it's just for us because of clashes that had happened before. And so we really felt that social cohesion has to be one of those three pillars. But then we didn't know that Lebanon is going to face its biggest economic crisis ever in starting 2020. And so in 2020, national food security in Lebanon became a very big problem because more than half of the country is food insecure in one way or another. So this social cohesion factor also became about how can we create an inclusive food system, because the whole country right now needs food security and needs agricultural solutions. And so it really shifted a lot over the years. And in a more general scale, because we really do want to create a scalable model, community is really at the heart of building farms anywhere, you know, because we don't want to just have a farm that is just selling food, but we really want to create this community of this farm that's a farm school and a hub where people come together, learn different agricultural skills, and then also grow food at the same time. And the system and the farm that we designed ended up being this multi-agricultural farm that combines regenerative agriculture with very low-tech adapted agricultural technologies. In the case of Lebanon, we chose hydroponics, where together they can grow 3.5 times more food in any given space. So it really maximizes production in a very efficient way. And it really produces a very wide range of food because it uses regenerative principles where you're planting very densely, planting really diverse crops, rotating the crops so you can really satisfy a person's yearly diet through that farm.
Mm. Yeah, amazing. So imagine that we were in Bekaa in Lebanon together and we were arriving to the farm. Walk me through what we would see, what we would hear, who we would meet, what we would experience.
Yeah, so when you'd first get to the farm, you would see this vast land. And on our farm, we have a refugee family that lives on the land. This is quite common in the Bekaa, where you have like a sort of a land caretaker family that is usually refugees who live on the land, who help us out, who get food, who are kind of like caretakers. You would also meet our farm manager, Erica, and our other team members, Fadi, Baha, Fatin, Noor. They're a group of young farmers, permaculturalists who have been helping us build this farm and who are actually our first community members. You would, on your left, see two greenhouses. One is our hydroponics greenhouse, where we have two adapted systems. One is the kind of NFT system, which we're growing vertically in pipes. We have pipes and water and lettuce right now, leafy greens growing in it. Another is kind of like a basin, a deep water culture system, where we have styrofoam and plants that are just growing in what looks like a swimming pool. And then behind it, we have a nursery for all of our crops. Then next to it, there's a common area, which is this common space that, you know, we gather in. And then you would see different plots, and each of those plots has a lot of different crops. We have flowers everywhere because we have marigold and zinnias in between them. You'd smell a lot of herbs because we also have a lot of herbs that are in between crops. We still haven't put our trees yet because it's a bit too hot in Lebanon right now, but starting the fall, you'd also have like stone fruits, apples, cherries, a lot of different trees. So you would see a lot of different levels of growth, and that all together create, you know, what looks a bit of like a very bushy food forest if you go towards the end of the summer because our crops would have grown. And then you'd see compost piles on the side. You'd see a dog running around who's our farm manager's dog, who's basically our guard dog right now. So, yeah, for now, you know, that's what you would see visiting us.
Sounds amazing. And it was lovely to see your face light up as you were talking about it. It must be such a beautiful space.
Yeah, it's been really nice seeing it build up from what was, so when we first got the land, it was just a field of green wheat. that we used as a cover crop. We put it back into the soil, but it was just this one field of green. And like seeing it change has been very exciting because it really makes you realize, that this is coming to life and it's becoming its own character and its own area. And so I'm really excited to see it grow. And I really have to give credit to our team of farmers on the ground because they've, really turned this vision into reality and in such a quick time that I'm really impressed with, with the progression of the project.
I think that's what's so interesting about it is because you had this really international co-creation and co-design process, and it seems to be very embedded still in the local ecosystem. So how did you manage that process and how did you ensure that this local embeddedness?
Yeah, so it's been a lot of back and forth, really. So as I mentioned before, it started in the local and it started in really understanding the local ecosystem. And then really having, like when we were in New York and we were doing the design sprints, we really had a lot of the local voices with us, not physically, but virtually. So during the first design sprint, we had a lot of the refugees that we initially had in the first design sprint also be part of the second one. Talk to people, they were being interviewed, and people in New York were actually understanding the local context from them. Then as we started defining our collective and our team, we had a few different team members in Lebanon that were really the local voices, and they were what we were testing with, when it comes to what would work, what wouldn't, getting insights from the ground, really embedding them into the process. So it's really been this back and forth. And I think through this process, we've met the right people. So I really do feel like the right people have come into this project that have made it very easy to work across time zones, across countries. Like we really used a lot of tools and sketches and sending things over WhatsApp, having Zoom meetings. Like we've really created this flow of working between both.
And I can imagine it wasn't always easy. What's been your biggest challenge in going from this beautiful concept that you co-designed together to actually implementing it on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of the challenges, I would say, when it comes to adaptation, one had to do with the local context. So as we were going through the design process, the local, systemic context of Lebanon was changing and is still changing drastically day after day. Like the economic situation keeps on getting worse, the food security situation keeps on getting worse. So there's a lot of things that we had to adapt and prioritize over other things. So that was one big challenge. Like, for example, procurement of certain materials, it has become more and more difficult. Prices have been fluctuating. So that has caused some, adaptations of what we include, what we don't. Then the other part is that in going from design model to adaptation, it's also what are the core, really important elements that we have to include in the first phase and what do we add next. So for example, in our design, we had this really nice community center that's made out of earth bricks that is really where everyone meets together. And we realized that the space that we originally envisioned is massive and it will take a lot of resources to build. And we don't have that huge community yet that would use it. So we said, why don't we just, instead of investing all that money right now in a community center, why don't we invest in the core basics, which are building the farm and the education program, and then from that build that community that would then be able to build the community center and would be able to make use of it. And so we have to scale down our land that we wanted from what was originally 15,000 square meters to 8,000 or 9,000 square meters. So we made things a bit smaller. We removed a few of the key elements, not removed them, but just worked on their core rather than the whole thing, and are slowly working towards that. And another challenge was actually the first challenge that we faced because of the economic situation in Lebanon was finding land. So because of everything fluctuating in Lebanon, a lot of people were unsure whether they wanted to sell their land, hold on to it, rent it, So that availability of land took us a very long time to find the right land. And so that also, in a way, delayed us a little bit. But we still ended up finding land by the time of the growing season. But it was a big challenge as well at the beginning.
Yeah, I think this land tenure question is always a big one whenever it comes to food related solutions. And
Yeah.
if I understand it correctly, you're interested to train people who can then go off and set up their own farms. And you already have a lot of women involved in that process as well.
Yeah.
So what challenges do you see in terms of them acquiring the land they need? And in particular, any gender issues that come into play in that process?
Our vision that we submitted to the Food System Vision Prize, it was really about how we could utilize 3% of Lebanon's land to feed every single Lebanese and refugee using our farm design because of how dense it is. And because Lebanon has actually like almost 70% arable land, but it's not properly utilized. So it imports 85% of its food when it could actually export so much more and at least only use 3% of its land to feed everyone when it comes to most of their at least vegetables and fruits and everything. So our vision became about building those hubs that are farm and our model farm in and of themselves, but also train people and then link them to unused land because there's a lot of that land, that 70% land that's unused, that could be used and could be cultivated. What we were thinking about is actually linking them either if they're the landowners themselves, giving them the tools in order to build the land and the training and everything. So basically cost sharing. And if they're not, linking them to farm owners or to landowners who are willing to have a farm on their land and then go from there. So basically have skilled labor that is turning their land into a farm, working on how to split the costs based on the landowner, what they want to do with the land. So as you can tell from what I've described about us being a collective of people working together, is that we don't really want to work alone. We really want to establish partnerships with different organizations and initiatives in the country in order to really create a much bigger impact. So we had identified a few local organizations that have been working on similar issues. And one of them, for example, has a database of people with land who are willing to work on that. So we were envisioning sort of partnership where we're the training space. Then we work with other organizations to find the land, to equip them. So it's really more of just like we do everything, but about finding the right partners. And in terms of the gender issue, this was actually one challenge that I forgot to mention when we went from design to implementation, is that our farm is women-led, and it wasn't really on purpose. It just happened that we were attracting a lot of women, and our farm manager is a woman, and we have more women farmers than male farmers at this point. And so having women in charge has been at some points met with certain comments, certain resistance, certain, not taking something seriously because women are saying them, so that that was a challenge. So in our education outreach, which we're running our first education program towards the end of the summer, but in our education outreach, we've been really focused on this equal representation of women and men and equal representation of Lebanese and refugees so that we ensure that it really is inclusive. So we hope that at this first step, ensuring that there's inclusivity that would ripple through our other stages of spreading regenerative agriculture.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I love how you're tackling this through a collective and through co-creation and collaborative design processes, because I think that is what we need in complex systems and with complex challenges. And I also think it means that it shapes new definitions of leadership and what leadership means. So I'm really interested to know, through the work you're doing, what does leadership mean to you? How do you define the leadership we need to tackle these big challenges that we're facing?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you said. And I do think that for me, complex problems, no one can solve them alone, So it really requires interrelated, multi-organizational approaches and solutions to really get them done, whether you're working at a small scale or at a big scale. So for me, I would say leadership is less hierarchical and less about, this is my strategy, what I want to do, and I'm telling you what to do, go and do it. Like, I don't think this is kind of a healthy way of leadership, especially when you're tackling these problems or even, in this day and age. But I really think it's more about, one, finding the right people to work together, but at the same time creating the right container and the right environment for every person to really give it their all. Because I think that one of the things that I love about how we've come up with the design for Farms and Arms is that it really brought a lot of different perspectives together and a lot of people with a lot of different expertise. And each one of them had the space to really share what they're best at. And by bringing all of these people together and creating that space to have those conversations, to have those brainstorming sessions, to really let each person bring something to the table, then we could create something that none of us alone would have been able to create. And so I really do think that part of leadership in a systemic environment, or when you're working with a complex problem, is really about creating that container, about making sure that you're helping each person feel heard and contribute to the table, and then about synthesizing what each person has, creating that common vision, bringing what everyone is saying, translating what one person's perspective is into how it fits into the bigger picture, really building that bigger picture, and keeping that kind of north node or that compass of like, this is the vision that we're working towards and where everyone fits in. But for me, I guess leadership is really about doing all of that, but really helping people give it their all and be part of something bigger.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to define it. And as always, with topics of leadership, it's much easier to talk about it than to do it. So when it comes to putting this into practice, to stepping into this type of leadership, what challenges do you find yourself facing personally?
I would say one of my biggest challenges was actually when you're dealing with something that's like really big as a food system, you're like, is this actually going to lead towards something? Am I actually doing a change? Are people still motivated? Are we actually going to, like, where's the light at the end of the tunnel? And so I think that there's always like this fluctuation of like, yes, we're all going to do this. Like, I know we can achieve it, or moments of self-doubt, moments of unclarity with what you're working towards, especially because if you don't have a solution at the end that this is where we're working towards, but you're working on solving the problem, you don't know what the end goal is. So I would say that working without that end goal in the first more unclear parts of the process is where you really need to trust yourself that everything is coming together and will be coming together neatly at the end.
I think that's so true. It's so normal when tackling any sort of big challenge that you do have those moments of kind of disillusionment or doubt or questioning, and that can sometimes feel deeply uncomfortable. So do you have any tips or things you've learned to help yourself navigate those times?
I would say one of the challenges that I've had as a person is that I always think big and dream big, and I always think about big systems and how can we solve them. And I remember even when I was wanting to write my thesis and my master's, I was thinking, okay, how can I narrow this down? Because I have so many things I want to do and I only have like 60 pages to write about it, So I think that one of the things that has helped me is really creating those parameters and really thinking, okay, this is the end goal, but how do we start now? What are the resources that we have now and how can we work with those resources? Like, what's most feasible right now and what can we do the most with the least amount of resources? And then delegating and making a smaller plan while still having the bigger plan in mind. So I really feel that this really narrowing down and zooming down really helps me think of, okay, let's think of the right now, because the big picture is always in the background.
It's super important, because otherwise one can get paralyzed by their own dreams and visions sometimes if they're so big.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or overwhelmed by problems, I think that especially being from a place like Lebanon where there's a lot of systemic problems happening all at once, it's like you don't know where to start. So in a way, just focusing will help you take the first step.
Yeah. So in your process of creating this project and implementing it, what are some of the stories that have really touched you, or some of the moments where you've really felt like, this is why I do this work?
Yeah, so the beginning of the project, one of the things that really touched me is how open people were to really letting me into their lives. When I was doing a lot of immersive research, going to farms, going to camps, talking to people, whether it's Lebanese or refugees who are working in agriculture. And it was very natural and very easy to just see how people were opening up to me and telling me a lot of different stories, and how nice and generous people were, especially people who don't have that much, but were giving me presents, giving me like a head of lettuce, giving me some fruits. So I really liked that generosity, and especially taking me to different places, letting me see different things. So I think it really touched me and really made me think, okay, no matter how much we like dream big, really the things that happen on the ground that matter the most. And then when we started building the farm, another thing that really touched me is I realized how the right people came together, like the right team on the ground came together, and actually is the starting point of the community that we've been dreaming of building with this project. I mean, we always thought that we'd start building the farm with the community, but we always thought that the community was going to be only the education participants, and never really thought that we're going to attract young Lebanese farmers who really have a huge passion about permaculture, about regeneration, and who will actually be so happy to be working on the ground and who would really bring this whole project together. So for me, it was a very beautiful thing to witness and to see them giving like a part of them and being so excited to be working on the farm and to really see this shift and the start of this community coming together, and even seeing interactions between our refugee caretaker family on the land, our team, how everyone sort of actually became a family. It was really nice to watch.
Yeah, that sounds really beautiful. If it's okay for you, I'm going to read out something that you tweeted that resonated with me.
Oh, yeah.
You said, "The transition to a regenerative system comes hand in hand with the rise of feminine values and with giving women equitable access and rights to land." I'm interested to know what your process has been to create space for feminine leadership values in your own work and life when we are often in systems that don't necessarily nurture them.
Yeah, so that's exactly what this tweet was about. It's because people sometimes just think of regeneration in terms of soil or in terms of restoring soil health or restoring climate. But I see it as a bigger picture. I mean, I obviously see it as that as well because we're doing that on the ground, but I see it as a bigger picture of systemic regeneration. And I really do think that as a world system, our world is very masculine and encompasses and places importance on masculine values. And masculine values don't necessarily have to be something that is only related to being a male. I think there's a lot of females in leadership position who are very masculine and who encompass those masculine values. And it's really about this taking action, harshness, competitiveness, this rise to the top, putting yourself first, like very individualistic. And I feel that a lot of the feminine values are more about care, nurturing, empathy, working as a collective, communal. So I really do think that this regenerative shift in agriculture also encompasses those more feminine values where you're really not thinking, how can I just maximize profit at the expense of everything else, whether it's the environment, whether it's the community. How can I really diversify? How can I bring people together? How can I really nurture and take care of the land? So I really do think that in our work, we're really putting those values into practice because we're really thinking about the community. Yes, we are putting women first, but we're also attracting males who want to do that. But we're also taking care of the land, restoring it. We have a seed-saving garden to really like nurture and preserve some of those organic, non-GMO seeds that are very hard to find nowadays. It's really putting that nurture and care of the community at the heart of it, which I think is part of the feminine. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I think we're working on encompassing that.
Mm-hmm. That's nice. So I like to ask all my guests this question because the podcast is called The Grateful. What does living a great and full life mean for you?
That's a nice question. So for me, I would say living a great and full life means living a life where you're in touch with yourself and what you really care about the most. And it's really about harnessing that inner connection that acts as like your inner compass and guidance to really work on the things that you care the most about and where you can do the least amount of harm and do the most amount of impact. And for different people, that means different things, and different people have different skills and can apply this in a different way. But I really do think it comes from being at peace with yourself, working on that inner conflicts, inner issues, inner connection to be able to, from that, create a better connection with the world around you.
Yeah, I think that's so beautiful. That question of where are we creating change from and starting there.
Yeah, exactly. And I really do think that, everyone can create change in a lot of different ways. And you need everyone in order to create change. So I really do think by being the most true to yourself, you'll be doing what you are meant to do the most. And then from that, you could create a better society.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Grateful Podcast. If you liked it, then please go ahead and subscribe and share it with a friend. And I would love to get your questions answered here. So if there's something that you would like answered or explored on this podcast, just send me an email to podcast@thegrateful.com and I'll do my very best to get your questions answered here on the show. Music in this episode came from Blue Dot Sessions.